Welcome back to Rad City Resin, where you get a new resin tutorial every week. You know, sometimes I get an idea for a project and I sit down at my desk and I fall into this like fugue dream state. And then when I finally look up, my idea has morphed into something completely unidentifiable from my original plan. It's like I fell into a creative wormhole. Does that ever happen to you? Some people call it getting in the zone, but I like to think of it as if I went on a trip through a lucid dream and now I have this cool souvenir that I can take back with me. One of my favorite items to make, especially as like a gift or even an item to sell, is customized compact mirrors. So I thought I'd take you along on this journey. Let's go through this lucid dream together. I'm going to start with this compact. It's cute, but it's kind of generic. So I'm going to give it a little bit of razzle dazzle. I buy these in bulk from Amazon, and I'll put a link down in the description below if you want to pick some up for yourself. I'm going to start by taking off this piece of plastic on the top here. I use my utility knife to lift the very edge of it and then kind of twist my utility knife like a lever, and it just pops right off. It comes off pretty easily. I scraped away some of the residue, mostly just to create a smoother surface, but trust me, it's going to be covered anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to use the plastic circle as a template to cut out a piece of iridescent cellophane. This is actually a gift bag from a craft store. I've been using it for months and still have so much of it left. I trimmed all of the excess cellophane away from the circle. This doesn't need to be super neat because I have a really fun way of hiding any edges later on down the road. I decided I needed a darker color underneath the cellophane to really make those colors pop. So I used some black gesso to fill in the white circle. You could use anything here, a marker, acrylic paint. You could even spray paint it if you wanted to. I just wanted my finished product to have a lot of layers and depth, so adding this dark color as my base is really going to help me out there. I let this dry for a few minutes, then I poured a very thin layer of UV resin directly into the center of that circle. Then I used an old paintbrush to kind of push it around so that it completely covered the entire surface. This layer is mostly here to hold my cellophane in place, and I wanted the cellophane to have kind of like a rippled look to it, so I pushed it around until it had like this sort of waviness about it. Once I was happy with the way that looked, I cured it for about 30 seconds. I didn't want to go too long because I didn't want my cellophane to start warping. And if you apply too much heat to cellophane, it will start to curl up, which is sometimes the look you're going for, but in this case was not. I used a pair of embroidery scissors to trim off the excess cellophane, and I trimmed away as much as I could, but again, I'm not super concerned about the edges here. I don't like to waste this stuff, even though it wasn't super expensive, so I have this little baggie that anytime I have excess, I just stuff it in there. And these little pieces come in handy when I'm making like beads and things like that. Now, I'm going to start building in some texture and depth. I poured some UV resin along one side of the circle. I didn't want this to spread all over, just along the left side. And then I added a few drops of this blue-green Picasso alcohol ink. It's my absolute favorite color ever. And I just let that mix itself into the resin. I also added a few drops of white ink into a drop of resin, and I mixed that really well, then dropped it into that green ink in little dots. Then I used my paintbrush to swirl it around to make some fun, smoky, inky plumes. I cured this section for about 1 minute. I did another section, then used what was left on my brush and on my mixing pad to swirl that into the next pool of resin. I cured this for another minute. Then I poured resin into the final section and dropped in some violet alcohol ink. Picasso alcohol inks are my favorite brand, and you will find a link to them down in the description below. I really loved how this was coming together. It looked like a mystical pool, like I could reach in and pull out an ancient artifact or a powerful relic. I cured this section for another minute. I decided to add a light dusting of my favorite Baltic Day chameleon powder with a soft brush. This is such a pretty blue-violet shift to it. It makes anything that you add it to just look ethereal and magical and mystical. I noticed that these colors kind of perfectly matched my new glitter. I can't think of the name offhand of the shop, but I'll make sure I put a link down below. They have some really beautiful glitters, some of like the most exciting glitters I've seen before. Again, I'm trying to build layers and textures. So what I did is I painted on a circle of resin around the rim and then used that same dotting tool to then just dab the glitter directly into the resin. I really love the color shift in this glitter. Honestly, I'm like a crow. Anything shiny just makes me happy. I want to hoard it all. Like I mentioned earlier, I had a plan to hide the rough edges, and for that, I bought this really pretty aqua colored rhinestone chain from Temu. I used the plastic circle from earlier to measure out how much chain I would need. Before applying it, I used some isopropyl alcohol to clean up the edges of the compact. I like to put my alcohol in this old makeup setting spray bottle because it has the finest mist. This quickly removes any residue and fingerprints. I started adhering the chain in small sections, and I used the plastic circle that came off of the compact to make sure the shape of the chain was accurate when I cured the resin. I actually somehow cut too little of the chain. I ended up missing 3 stones, so I just cut 3 off and then glued them into that gap. It was around this time that the creative imp in my brain said, "You must have more sparkle." So I added a second clear rhinestone chain around the outer edge. This one was way easier to apply because I was able to just follow the edge of that first chain. I really loved the look of the mirror at this point, and honestly, I thought I was done with it. I set it aside to go have dinner, and then when I came back to it, I looked at it again, and the center of it just kind of looked empty. So I started rummaging through my supplies, and I found this little charm with a little cameo in the center. And I absolutely loved the bezel. It perfectly matched the clear rhinestones. So I decided to remove the cameo portion and cut off the bail. And I got a little too aggressive and broke off a lot more than I had planned to, and it left a gap. I was so bummed by this because I really, really wanted to use this bezel. It was so pretty, and like the shape of it was really nice. The way the crystals came off of it was really nice, but I broke it. And honestly, like, I don't like wasting things. I immediately started looking through my bead supply to try to find something to fill that gap. Again, Temu to the rescue. I had these little crystal hearts that I got from my last Temu order, and it just so happened to fit exactly in that space. I promise you, I did not do that on purpose. It just happened to work. I really loved how this looked. It almost made it look like a crown, and I thought that just was so fitting. So I placed the bezel on my silicone pad and filled the bottom with some resin. I also used a dab of resin to fix the heart into that gap at the top. I had these iridescent nail paper stickers from my Temu order, so I used one right directly in the center. It fit perfectly, but honestly, by the end of the project, I couldn't even really see it anymore, so next time I think I would just skip it. And I covered this with a few drops of resin, then added like 1 or 2 drops of blue-green alcohol ink. Then I added some iridescent flakes into that resin mix. I really loved how this kind of looked like an opal. I kept adding more and more because I didn't want to see little gaps between the flakes. I wanted it all to like kind of look like a shattered opal in the center. So once I was satisfied, I added more resin onto the top of the flakes, and then I cured that for 1 full minute. I placed the bezel into the center of the compact. Then I flooded the surrounding area with resin. I made sure it touched all edges, and I pushed the bezel around a little bit to make sure the resin surrounded it as well. I wanted to make sure that this was not going to come apart. I cured this really well for about 3 minutes. Isn't she beautiful? I absolutely love how the colors melt together. If you look at it from different angles, you'll see the color shift and it almost looks like you could dip your fingers right into it. You know, sometimes I just can't stop adding more and more elements to something, but in spite of that, I really love how this project turned out. I think this would make a great gift for an aspiring princess, or maybe even a fairy queen, or even just your local cosplayer. Who would you gift it to? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to find me on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. I'd really love to see what you make, what you're getting up to, and I'd just love to know your thoughts on today's project. And go make something rad today. If you like this video, check out my resin tutorial playlist.